Alex Spencer had spent the past 11 years of his life building the digital foundation of Apex Solutions. At 43, he was the silent architect of the company's success. Without him, none of the manufacturing systems would be able to function, none of the orders would be processed, and the company's critical infrastructure would be in shambles. Yet, despite his dedication, no one truly knew the extent of his work. His name wasn't emblazoned on the company's website, nor did the quarterly reports mention the countless hours Alex had spent ensuring the company's IT systems ran smoothly. He had arrived at Apex Solutions in his early 30s, after a tough divorce that had left him reeling. The job was supposed to be a temporary stopgap, a way to fill the gap in his life while he figured out his next move. But Alex was good at what he did. Very good. The job wasn't just a means to an end, it became his passion. He had taken the company's outdated systems and transformed them into a sleek, modern infrastructure that allowed the business to function seamlessly. What Alex didn't realize, though, was that his place at Apex Solutions wasn't as secure as he thought. He had given everything to the company, his late nights, his weekends, his unrelenting dedication to making sure the servers didn't crash. But in return, he received little recognition. It was always just part of the job. One afternoon, he received a meeting invitation from the CEO, Ethan Blake. It was for lunch at Maxwell's, a swanky, upscale restaurant. Alex had been to Maxwell's only once before for a client meeting, and he knew it wasn't the kind of place where one went for casual talks. So when the invitation arrived, he had a bad feeling in his gut, but tried to brush it off. Ethan had always been a fan of appearances, and the lunch was probably just another effort to discuss the company's upcoming plans. But when Alex arrived, he quickly realized something was wrong. Ethan greeted him with a smile, cutting into his steak as he spoke. "Alex, you've been invaluable to the company. The work you've done for us, it's been incredible." Ethan paused, looking at Alex over the top of his glass. "But we need fresh perspectives now. A new direction." Alex blinked. Fresh perspectives? He had been the one who had turned the company's digital systems around. The entire infrastructure, from firewalls to data backups, was his doing. Without him, the company would still be running outdated systems and constantly fighting security issues. But Ethan didn't seem to see it that way. The CEO continued, "We've found someone new to lead the IT department. My nephew, Leo. He's a recent graduate from MIT, brilliant kid, specialized in digital transformation." Alex sat in stunned silence. He had suspected that something was off, but hearing those words from Ethan made it all too real. After everything he had done for this company, after building its entire IT framework from nothing, from the ground up, he was being replaced by a kid fresh out of college, the CEO's nephew no less. "Leo will be taking over," Ethan continued, unaware of how hard the words were hitting Alex. "He's got vision for where tech is heading, and frankly, we need someone who won't push back when the board makes certain decisions." Ethan's words were as cold and businesslike as the steak on his plate. Alex took a deep breath, forcing a smile. He nodded in acknowledgement, his mind racing as he processed the weight of what was happening. "I understand, Ethan. These things happen," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. But Alex had seen it coming for months. He had felt the tension building within the company, the subtle signs that his time at Apex was running out. Ethan looked relieved that Alex wasn't causing a scene. "We'll give you 6 weeks to help with the transition. The announcement will come after the next quarterly meeting," he said, clearly eager to wrap things up. As the waiter brought dessert, Ethan slid a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) across the table. "Please sign this before we finish lunch." Alex took the pen and signed the NDA without a second thought, his mind elsewhere. The document was just another piece of the puzzle, a formal acknowledgement of his replacement. The rest of the lunch passed in silence, with Ethan discussing the company's future plans, oblivious to the emotional toll his words had taken on Alex. Back at his desk later that afternoon, Alex found that his admin credentials had already been downgraded. His name was removed from the leadership email chain, and his access to key systems was cut off. It was clear that the decision had been made long before lunch. Ethan had likely planned this transition months ago, but the lunch was just a formality, a way to make it seem like it was Alex's choice to walk away with dignity. Despite the shock, Alex didn't feel angry, at least not yet. What bothered him was the realization that they weren't just replacing him. They had been preparing for this for months. As he sat at his desk, staring at the empty computer screen, a sickening feeling began to settle in. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, but the thought of how easily he had been replaced, as though his years of hard work meant nothing. That night, unable to sleep, Alex did what he knew best. He dove into the server logs. As he scrolled through the system records, a chill ran down his spine. Over the past few months, he had noticed small, unauthorized access attempts from an IP address he traced to the executive floor of the building. Someone had been poking around in the systems, looking at his security protocols and contingency plans, examining everything he had built, before they even made the decision to fire him. The days after the lunch with Ethan were a blur for Alex. He sat at his desk in a fog, pretending to work while the weight of betrayal settled in his chest. The company, once his second home, now felt like a place that didn't want him anymore. He had been at the core of their success, building their IT infrastructure from the ground up, ensuring every operation ran smoothly. And yet, they had already decided his fate. The very next day, Alex's suspicions were confirmed. His access to critical systems had been revoked. The email accounts he managed were no longer under his control. His name was removed from the leadership team's communications. Alex's credentials were downgraded without so much as a warning. It was as if they wanted to erase every trace of his existence from the company's digital footprint. The worst part was that the changes had happened instantly, as though they had already prepared for his departure before the lunch even took place. Alex wasn't surprised by the cold efficiency of it all. He had known, in the back of his mind, that something like this was coming. The signs had been there for months. He had begun to notice subtle shifts within the company, small decisions that didn't make sense unless someone had already made up their mind about the future. It all started back in September, a few months before the lunch. A consultant had come into the company unannounced, tasked with auditing their digital infrastructure. He asked basic, almost naive questions about systems that Alex had designed personally. When Alex asked who authorized the audit, the consultant mentioned the executive team, then quickly changed the subject. At that point, Alex didn't think much of it, but soon after, his access to the board's meeting minutes disappeared. The reason cited was server cleanup, but Alex could tell it was something else. When his weekly briefings with Ethan started getting canceled, he knew they were slowly phasing him out. Each excuse seemed reasonable on the surface, but the pattern was unmistakable. By December, Alex's role within the company had become increasingly isolated. At the New Year's leadership retreat, he overheard Ethan talking to the majority owner, Harrison Wells, about Leo, Harrison's nephew, graduating from MIT. Ethan was practically gushing over how brilliant Leo was, and how companies from Silicon Valley were vying for his attention. Alex didn't think much of it at the time, but in hindsight, he should have. It was a sign that they had already decided who would take over his position. The final nail in the coffin came when Vanessa, one of Alex's most trusted team members, told him about a meeting she had been invited to, a strategic planning session that Alex should have led. When Vanessa mentioned Alex's name, Ethan had immediately changed the subject. Vanessa had sensed something was wrong and felt that the company was making plans around Alex without his knowledge. But Alex wasn't one to let things slip by. He had been loyal to the company for so long, but this felt different. Something inside him snapped. He wasn't just going to sit back and let them dismantle everything he had worked for without a fight. That evening, Alex stayed late in the server room, his mind racing. The hum of the machines, the flashing lights, the cool air from the air conditioning. It was his sanctuary, his space. He ran his hand along the edge of the main console, remembering the countless hours he had spent selecting every component, building redundancies, creating fail-safes to ensure that the company's systems wouldn't fail. This was his domain, his legacy. But as he sat in the quiet of the room, he realized that it wasn't just about being replaced. They weren't just bringing in Leo to lead the IT department. They were dismantling Alex's entire system and taking everything he had built. His expertise, his knowledge, and his custom solutions were being discarded, replaced by a kid with a shiny resume. And then, it hit him. They weren't just phasing him out. They had been planning this for months, quietly picking apart his work, studying his systems. They had been mining him for everything he knew, extracting the knowledge he had gained over the years to hand it over to someone else. Leo wasn't there to innovate. He was there to absorb, to take what Alex had created and make it his own. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. What had started as a job he took to keep himself busy after his divorce had turned into a pivotal part of his life. He had poured his heart and soul into Apex Solutions, and now they were replacing him without a second thought. It was hard to shake the feeling that, despite everything he had done, the company didn't care about him at all. But Alex was no fool. He had built something irreplaceable. His proprietary systems were not just part of the company's infrastructure. They were his intellectual property. They couldn't just erase him that easily. He had made sure of it. He had already started noticing small, unauthorized access attempts in the server logs. Attempts from an IP address he traced to the executive floor. Someone had been poking around his systems, looking at his documentation, his contingency plans. This wasn't just about replacing him, it was about stealing his knowledge and ensuring that Leo could seamlessly take over without missing a beat. The next day, Alex met with Luis, a member of his team who had been working alongside him for years. Over coffee at a local cafe, Alex told Luis what he had figured out. Luis wasn't surprised. He had noticed strange behavior from the higher-ups too. "They've been asking weird questions, having me explain your systems," Luis admitted. "I didn't want to say anything, but it's been happening for a while now." Alex wasn't angry. He understood. Luis had a family, a mortgage, and couldn't risk speaking out. But that didn't change what was happening. Alex knew the company was trying to steal everything he had built. They had already begun the transition process, replacing him with Leo while stripping Alex of his access and his role. "What's your plan?" Luis asked, his voice soft. Alex smiled grimly. "I don't have a plan yet, but I'm working on it." Luis gave him a knowing look. He wasn't worried about Alex. Alex had always been a problem solver, and Luis trusted him. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you," Luis said, offering his support. Alex appreciated the gesture, but he knew this battle was far from over. He wasn't just going to let them take everything he had worked for without a fight. There was more at stake now than just his job. It was about protecting his legacy, his work, and his intellectual property. Later that night, Alex sat in front of his computer, analyzing the server logs again. He didn't sleep that night. He needed to prepare for what was coming. He had a plan in motion, and he was going to make sure he wasn't forgotten. Alex's life had been turned upside down in the span of just a few days. He had gone from being the cornerstone of Apex Solutions' IT infrastructure to a forgotten name, replaced by a bright young graduate with no understanding of the systems Alex had spent years perfecting. But as the days dragged on, a sense of clarity settled in. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about taking back control of his legacy, his work, and the intellectual property that he had created. The first sign that Alex was ready to fight back came when he met with his old colleague, Chris, a network security specialist he had worked with years ago. After explaining the situation, Chris had a single question for him. "Why now? The company is doing well. Why push you out?" It was a good question, one Alex had been asking himself for days. 2 days later, Chris called. "You need to see this," he said, urgency in his voice. When Alex arrived at the diner where they had arranged to meet, Chris slid a stack of papers across the table. It was a set of SEC filings showing that Apex Solutions was preparing to be acquired by TechCore Industries, a massive manufacturing conglomerate based out of Boston. The deal was contingent on demonstrating modernized technology, which meant that Alex's systems, his proprietary software, were a major selling point. But what shook Alex to the core was the revelation that Harrison Wells, the majority owner of Apex, had cashed out most of his shares in the last quarter. This acquisition wasn't about making Apex more successful. It was about lining the pockets of the executives who stood to gain the most from the sale. Alex's role in the company had never just been technical. It had been pivotal to the company's value. They were pushing him out, not just to replace him, but to clean up the company's image for the acquisition. Alex was the key to their valuation, and they knew it. Armed with this knowledge, Alex began formulating a plan. If they were going to erase him, he was going to make sure they paid for it. He wasn't just going to walk away without ensuring that his hard work and intellectual property were recognized and protected. The next morning, Alex woke up early and headed straight to the office. It was the final countdown. He needed to take full control of his work before they could claim it. Over the next few days, he filed provisional patents on critical aspects of his software, parts of System Sync that made it uniquely capable of integrating with Apex's machinery. He wasn't filing for everything, but he was covering his bases. The last thing he wanted was for his work to be sold off to a third-party vendor without proper compensation. Then came the meeting with his lawyer. Together, they reviewed all the documentation, the agreements, and the emails that Alex had gathered. His lawyer confirmed what Alex already knew. Apex couldn't just take his work without proper compensation. He had legal grounds to fight back, and that was exactly what he was going to do. The days that followed were filled with intense planning. Alex had been methodical in how he protected his systems. He copied all the original code he had developed, transferred it to a secure server off-site, and ensured that any changes made to his work would be traceable. He was building an ironclad case for himself, and just as importantly, he was protecting the systems that would continue to work, even after his departure. Luis, his trusted colleague, played a key role in helping Alex gather all the necessary files and documentation. When the time came to transfer the code, Luis handed Alex a flash drive with everything he needed. "It's all there," Luis said quietly, handing him the drive. "Do what you need to do." On the day of his final meeting with Ethan and HR, Alex walked in with a sense of calm. The game was set, and he was playing by his rules now. He knew they were trying to get him to accept their settlement offer and walk away quietly, but Alex wasn't going to do that. The meeting started with Preston sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Diane from HR. "We're accelerating the transition," Preston said, his tone dismissive. "Your last day will be next Friday. We'll need all the documentation and training completed by Wednesday. We don't need to drag this out." Alex nodded slowly, keeping his expression neutral. "I understand, but I'd like to discuss something first." He placed a document on the table in front of them. It was a copy of the original agreement for System Sync, the software he had developed before joining Apex. "I'm sure you're aware that this system was developed before I ever came here," he said, his voice steady. "It was licensed to Apex Solutions, but I retained ownership." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "That was 10 years ago, Alex. The company has evolved since then." Alex leaned forward. "System Sync has evolved, but its roots are mine. I'd like proper compensation for it." Diane exchanged a glance with Preston, clearly stalling. "Our legal team has determined that all systems, including System Sync, are company property. We'll give you a generous separation package, Alex. We just need you to cooperate." Alex wasn't buying it. "I'm not interested in the separation package," he said, his voice firm. "I want what's mine." By the end of the meeting, Alex knew they weren't going to hand over the rights to his intellectual property without a fight. But he had one final trick up his sleeve. Over the next few days, he completed the required transition documentation and met with the new team. He played the part of the dutiful employee, answering questions and helping Leo and the others get up to speed. But in the background, Alex was working quickly. He transferred his original code to a private server and updated the license for System Sync to expire precisely 1 week after his official departure. Friday came, and Alex walked into the office to complete his final tasks. He handed in his badge and signed the exit paperwork, declining the farewell lunch that had been arranged. He left the office with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He knew what would happen next. That weekend, Alex made sure everything was in place. He had already prepared a clean legal transition path for his software, ensuring that the code would continue to function even if the new team tried to modify it. He had added a digital signature verification system that would notify him if anyone tried to tamper with his work. Monday morning arrived, and at exactly 9:17 a.m., when Apex Solutions' production lines were running at full capacity, the software did what it was designed to do. It stopped working. Every instance of system sync across the 3 facilities displayed the same message: license expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:20, the first production line had halted. By 9:45, all 3 facilities were offline, and the chaos that followed was swift. At 10:30, Alex's phone rang. It was Preston. "What the hell did you do?" Preston's voice was tight with panic. "I didn't do anything," Alex replied calmly. "The software license expired. As the developer, I'm happy to discuss renewal terms." Preston fumed on the other end of the line. "This is sabotage!" "No," Alex said evenly. "It's business. Check the original agreement from 11 years ago. The technology was licensed to the company, but it was never purchased. I'm happy to discuss terms for renewal." By 3 p.m., the lawyers had reviewed the documents, and by 5 p.m., the agreement was signed. Alex had secured proper compensation for his work, and the licensing terms were updated. The following week, Alex received an unexpected call from TechCore Industries. They wanted to meet with him about his expertise and offered him a consulting role. The salary was double what Apex had paid him, and he would have full control over his working hours. At the same time, he learned that Nathan had been quietly removed from his position at Apex after 3 major clients threatened to pull out due to the system failures. Preston remained CEO, but his role was more ceremonial than anything else. As for Alex, he started his new life on his terms. He built a consultancy business with former colleagues, turning what had been a personal betrayal into an opportunity for growth. He never felt the vindication he expected, but he did feel a quiet certainty that he had done what was necessary. A year later, Alex ran into Preston at a local restaurant. Preston approached his table, looking tired and worn. "You won," he said simply. Alex met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "It wasn't about winning," he replied. "It was about knowing my worth." With that, Preston walked away, leaving Alex to watch the city lights flicker on across the river. As the night settled in, Alex reflected on what he had built, what he had lost, and what he had regained. The systems he had created, both digital and personal, were the ones that had outlasted everything. And in the end, they were all that truly mattered.